What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, July 18th, 2017, getting into the week here. We'll have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air. A couple of quick program notes. Tomorrow in our third hour, our guest will be Charlie Robinson. He's got a new book out called The Octopus of Global Control, which is basically talking about this rush toward a new world order and this long-standing plan to end private property ownership by us serfs. In other words, neo-feudalism, a return to serfdom under the gentle guiding hands of the world's elite. And it's 20 years from now, it's going to look like we're living in Game of Thrones, I guess, is the plan, or something like that. All right, let's get into the news here. Obviously, the big news right now, it looks like the attempt to repeal Obamacare is pretty much over and done with. As you know, they were going to put a hold on the vote because John McCain is in the hospital from his serious surgery the other day. But apparently, two more GOP senators, Mike Lee of Utah and Jerry Moran of Kansas, basically said they had to withdraw their votes as well. So there's no way that it was going to pass. And as a result, Mitch McConnell has basically scrapped the Senate health care bill. And so we're back to status quo ante. Obamacare is still the law of the land, and the fingers are being pointed all over. Chuck Schumer's out there screaming that Trump is trying to destroy Obamacare. Well, maybe it ought to be. I mean, look how much harm it's caused with these sky-high premiums for health insurance companies and sky-high deductibles, so you never get to use those policies. This was a giveaway to the health insurance industries, plain and simple. And have you noticed of late, the more the government tinkers with your life, the worse things get? And that is definitely a symptom of living in a fascist regime here. Now, as you know, there's been yet another Arcanicide. This one, of course, Klaus Eberwein. And again, he was just a week away from testifying regarding the corruption of the Clinton Foundation down in Haiti. And he was going to testify, about how the foundation basically just spent a single-digit % of the money they collected on behalf of Haiti on Haiti, and the rest just sort of disappeared into administrative fees. And he'd spoken out before during the actual campaign. He had a press conference. Eberwein had run Haiti's Economic Development Agency from 2012 to 2015. And apparently he's been shot in the head, and it's ruled a suicide because, of course, anybody who dies anywhere around the Clintons, by default, it is a suicide. Now, more of the Obama officials are facing investigation in this unmasking probe, and apparently the unmasking goes beyond key officials like Susan Rice, who apparently, she may be in some legal trouble. CIA Director John Brennan and former ambassador to the UN Samantha Power. And the source told Fox News that more than a half dozen former senior Obama administration officials are now of interest to House committee investigators. And notice how the corporate media is still obsessed about Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. Now, author Max Blumenthal has gone public saying he's very skeptical of this whole Russia-Trump narrative, and he made a cute comment saying Rachel Maddow's dots may never connect. And again, as we reported yesterday, polls are showing people are turning away from this. The number of Americans who believe this Trump-Russia nonsense is down by half since April. It's losing ground. People are just getting tired of hearing it because that's almost all the corporate TV news media is shouting about these days. Trump and Russia, Russia and Trump. And we're hearing all these other things going on in the background about all these other scandals, and the corporate media's attitude is, we're not interested in them. You shouldn't be interested in them. We will tell you what you should be upset and angry about. And they're not getting much success along that. But in the end, what Donald Trump Jr. did was not illegal. It isn't even unusual in the world of politics and business. but it looks like he got baited on into this thing so that they could make a big deal about it to keep on selling this idea that Russia somehow stole the election for Donald Trump. And remember, the inside sources are saying the Hillary campaign came up with that in the first 24 hours after Hillary realized she had lost to Donald Trump. And she was still in tantrum mode and, beating up John Podesta and hurling ashtrays at the wall or whatever else it is. And she said, we'll tell them Russia stole the election. They'll tear Trump out. They'll put me in. Hasn't happened. This is July, by the way. And again, we need to get on back to an issue that Oliver Stone did raise on the Letterman show. Everyone's talking about Russia interfering with our internal politics. What about Israel? Israel is so entrenched in American politics, they even have institutions right here on our soil, such as AIPAC, and all these other think tanks, and all these other pro-Israel organizations and lobbying groups. Even if Russia is tinkering with our internal politics, it's microscopic compared to what Israel's been doing, and nobody wants to make a big deal about that. Oh, we can never question Israel's influence over our politics. They'll call us an anti-Semite, and I'll have to cry. All right, we're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, this story about Donald Trump Jr. in this meeting continues to get murkier and murkier because the Russian translator at this meeting worked with the State Department and the FBI when Robert Mueller was head of the FBI. And, of course, now he's the special counsel. And more, it looks like Donald Trump Jr. got baited into the meeting. They were going to promise him, oh, we're going to give you all this dirt on Hillary Clinton. It's going to be wonderful. It'll help your father win the election. And, of course, when he got into the meeting, there was nothing there. All they had was what was available on the Internet to begin with. And the discussion focused mostly on the repeal of the Magnitsky Act, which was impeding certain Russian businesses. And that was it. There was nothing there. And they're trying to make a big deal about it. They're still pushing this Russia-Trump collusion. Now, getting on back to Haiti, this is really turning into a big stink down there. There is this billionaire named Gary Heaven, and he basically went public with a message to Hillary Clinton because he's very involved down there in Haiti. And he basically comes on out and he says, Hillary, let me give you a word. First of all, I'm wealthier than you are, and here I am with my money, my hands. I'm flying aircraft into these dangerous situations. The head of the Senate here in Haiti said that if the billions you collected for the children here, only 2% got here. You are a grand level thief, and the world needs to know about it. Americans need to know about it. If we dare trust you with anything, we're fools. And you've proven it over and over again. But Haiti, you can't explain this away. Look around. Do you see any Clinton Fund trucks or airplanes? They aren't here, and I'm an eyewitness. You have the audacity to act as if you care about people. I know you're a psychopath. And it goes on, and I love this one quote. Every time I put food in the mouths of these children, I think of what a creepy witch you are. Well, Gary, don't sugarcoat it like that. Please tell us how you're really feeling. Meanwhile, story coming on out of Investment Watch blog, the Clinton Cash, let me back up. The Clinton Cash author Peter Schweitzer has been looking at the books of the Clinton Foundation and says, first of all, they're obfuscated. It's very hard to track where the money is going. But basically, 94% of the money the Clinton Foundation took in just sort of went away. That means only 6% of the money taken in by the Clinton Foundation actually went to any kind of charitable work. The rest was all absorbed by travel expenses and administrative expenses and, of course, media campaigns. Basically, the Clinton Foundation did just enough charity so they could send out camera crews and say, see, we're doing charity. But looking at the official foundation filings, it's only 6%. And to qualify as a tax-exempt charitable foundation, you are required to spend at least 51% of the money that you take in on charitable actions. So under IRS rules, the Clinton Foundation doesn't qualify as a tax-exempt charitable foundation. And at the very least, the Clintons could personally be on the hook for the income taxes of that $2 billion they collected. And this stuff is out there, and it's easy to track down. And the corporate media and members of Congress don't want to be bothered with it because Hillary Clinton is part of that deep state, the narcocracy. And everybody in the corporate media and everybody in the Congress are looking at those piles and piles of rotting corpses, and they don't want to join that particular club. It's rule by terror. Meanwhile, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton has issued a statement in response to a July 13 Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration report, which tried to explain away the failure of the IRS to respond to all of Judicial Watch's Freedom of Information Act requests by saying, well, our records management practices aren't good, and we've got all kinds of lost records, and we can't find them. We don't know where they went. They were on Lois Lerner's hard drive when it crashed. Blah, 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 blah. And, of course, Tom Fitton is not buying this, and neither should you. They don't want to turn over the records on how the Obama administration was using the IRS as a weapon. And so it's this whole lost record situation. Yeah, the files are missing. We're sorry. Can't find them. There was a fire or something. The dog ate the data that you wanted. Former House Speaker Dennis Hastert has been released early from a prison in Minnesota. He's apparently under the supervision of a residential reentry management field officer in Chicago, which means he's either at a halfway house or he's in home confinement. So he's not completely free on the streets yet to go out and molest more boys. But he was allowed out early. And it's just another reminder that politics attracts the criminal class. Now that we have the internet and the independent media, Americans are getting a much more accurate look at the reality of their politicians as opposed to this packaged, promoted, advertised, sold imagery of the corporate media. And according to this story over at Zero Hedge, polls are now showing Americans' massive disapproval of both parties. Americans are fed up. They don't want the Republicans. They don't want the Democrats. Everyone understands the federal government has turned into an oligarchy. They're just out there for themselves to grab from you and share with their cronies, and that's it. It's fascism, is what it is. And that's why we're being forced to buy products that are unsafe, indeed dangerous. And if not that, they're completely, utterly worthless. Because it's all about the money and everybody getting their share who's on the inside. Okay, let's go ahead and take a phone call here. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. I just want to make a quick comment, change the subject a little bit. I want to ask you a hypothetical question. What if the French Art Academy accepted Adolf Hitler as a painter? Will World War II have started?
It's hard to say. Certainly Hitler would not have been a major part of it. I mean, he did serve as a soldier in World War I. But again, if you look behind the official story for public consumption about Hitler invading all these countries, you have to understand that before World War II, Great Britain was planning on getting some kind of a war going to take Germany down, because Germany, with its science and engineering and manufacturing, was proving to be a tremendous challenge to Britain's economic dominance. So I think there probably would have been a war. We would have just had a different villain to boo and hiss at.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
All right, I'm going to let you go there. Turning over to the war zones here, civilian deaths in Afghanistan have hit a new record high. Do you realize we have been in Afghanistan 16 years? We have kids just now going into high school who have never lived in a year that we were not at war in Afghanistan. And apparently, according to the United Nations, 1,662 civilians have been killed in the first half of 2017, the highest civilian toll of the entire war. And I'm willing to take a guess here that probably those numbers are low, that they haven't found all the bodies yet. And apparently casualties among women are up 23% and up 9% among children. The slaughter just continues, the slaughter of the innocents, as it were. Now, apparently the Syrian army is now advancing on the ISIS-held town of Sukna, and they're gaining ground there. and apparently pro-Turkish militants will not be able to break the YPG defense without direct assistance from the Turkish army. Turkey's already down there dropping bombs. Now they're making noises like they're going to cross the border into Syria. And again, that is without the permission of the Syrian government. I can imagine Assad is saying there, look, we're going to put stop signs on the border here because y'all keep coming in and you're not welcome. Now, the other day, we talked about how Benjamin Netanyahu was very upset over this ceasefire deal between the U.S., Syria, and Russia. It's only in a tiny part of Syria, but it was considered a symbolic move toward peace, and it's down toward the south of Syria. And Netanyahu came on out and said, no, we refuse to accept this, which is weird because Israel had no part in this. And then Netanyahu comes out with a list of demands. If you will do all of this, we will settle down and let you go forward with your peace plan, like it was up to him. And, of course, what Israel wants is the Golan. They want it permanently to be part of Israel with all that oil and gas that's underneath it. That's what they want. Well, now, to nobody's surprise, the U.S.-backed terrorists in Syria have come on out and say, well, no, we don't agree with this ceasefire deal at all, and we are not going to comply. We will not abide by the terms of the agreement. So here you have the United States, once again, playing both ends against the middle. On one side, they're saying, yes, we must have peace, and yet their mercenaries in Syria are saying, no, we're not going to go along with it. So Huffington Post put up this tragic image. It's an aerial image split into by time. Actually, it's a satellite image, before and after, showing the destruction of Mosul. And after 9 months of war, there are areas of that city that are completely obliterated. There's nothing left standing. No buildings, no trees, nothing. It's just dirt and rubble as far as the eye can see. And already we can see the money junkies at their banks coming on in and saying, don't worry, we will gladly loan you all the money you need to rebuild the city you used to have at, say, 20% interest. That's why bankers love war so much. Creates debt, creates customers. Now, over in the breakaway republics in Ukraine, the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic separatists have gotten together and declared a new country called Malorossiya, or Little Russia. And they're basically saying, okay, this is now who we are and what we are doing. And again, all of this is allowed under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So immediately France has called on Putin to condemn the creation of Malorossiya. That's not going to fly at all. So now, as you know, China is starting to build some very advanced weapons, and apparently their newest destroyer will be taking part in joint drills with Russia in the Baltic Sea. It's going to be a heck of a trip for the crew of that Chinese ship. They're going to get to see a lot of the world from the deck of their ship. But it signals that Russia and China are pulling together as a unit to be dealt with in the coming World War. Now, the U.S. war planners have been following a policy of just picking off one country at a time and just moving their forces forward. Didn't work out that way because we're still mired in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and all these other places. We're running out of resources. And maybe we could still take on Russia in a conventional war, and maybe we could still take on China in a conventional war. We certainly cannot take them on both at the same time. And I think that is the message that is being sent by Russia and China. Don't think you can come after us one by one. Meanwhile, longtime Clinton ally Paul Begala has come on out and said it's time for a debate if we should just nuke Russia. So Paul Craig Roberts was right. They're actually thinking about this in D.C. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over in Romania, President Klaus Iohannis is out there talking tough, saying that NATO can deter Russia. And he said it in the context of more of these NATO drills in Eastern Europe, pushing up against the border with Russia. And, of course, Russia does not want war. They want trade, peace through commerce. Putin is not coming to steal Europe or the United States. He's got enough problems handling Russia. He doesn't need Europe right now. Europe is on the edge of bankruptcy. So is the United States. Europe is in turmoil over the refugees and the migrants. Russia doesn't need that headache. And again, look who is moving up their armed forces to whose border. Russia is not the aggressor here. We're not seeing Russian troops on the northern side of the Canadian border or the southern side of the Mexican border. We're not seeing Russian battle groups sailing around the Gulf of Mexico. We can see with our own eyes who the aggressor is here. And we're not being fooled by this nonsense about Russia's the bad guy, Russia's the bad guy. We can see who the bad guy is. We've been seeing for 16 years who's been actually invading and bombing and regime changing other countries. Now, things seem to be heating up over in Iran. And apparently Donald Trump is out there saying he supports Israel's goal to prevent the Iranian rush through Syria. That's Israel's new thing, that Iran is going to just blow through Syria and invade Israel, forgetting the historic reality that Iran has not initiated a war of conquest in over 200 years. But Israel's starting to talk tough. I think Netanyahu is imagining he's going to evade his public image problems over his corruption trial by getting into some more wars. And he's out there saying that Israel refuses to tolerate Iranian bases in either Lebanon or Syria. So he's out there actually talking about launching these unprovoked attacks into Syria and Lebanon to blow up bases he says are being used by Iran. And maybe they are and maybe they aren't. It's still an act of war and aggression on Israel's part. Meanwhile, Yalon is saying that the next time they go to war in Lebanon, Israel will destroy their infrastructure. They're just out there throwing the threats around left and right. Another article along the same line from Jerusalem Post: Israel may need to take out Iranian bases in Syria. It's amazing here. Meanwhile, over in Iran, their Aerospace Force Brigadier General Amir Hajizadeh said that all of this focus on Iran's missile power, which is outside the P5+1 deal, it's aimed at weakening the Islamic Republic, of bit by bit trying to politically disarm them, to get them to surrender their weapons. Just give up your guns. We'll take care of you. And how often have we seen how badly that worked here in the United States? And that's exactly what's going on. The United States is getting tired of having to work so hard to conquer all these countries it wants to conquer. Now, yesterday we were getting a bit of a feed that Tillerson was going to come on out with an announcement about Iran and the P5+1 deal. And apparently it was going back and forth. And they were out there with this comment here. This came out of the Saudi Gazette. Iran to face consequences for breaching the spirit of the P5+1 deal. Now, this came out just after the IAEA reported Iran is fully in compliance with the P5+1 deal. And now the U.S. wants to make a big stink over Iran's intermediate-range missiles, saying that possession of the intermediate-range missiles has violated the spirit of the deal, whatever the heck that means. Now, at one point, it did look like Trump was going to call off the deal and pull out of it, but apparently there were some very late discussions at the White House, and at the last second, Donald Trump went ahead and recertified the P5+1 deal. So it is still in place, and whatever plans they have for Iran are back on hold. And I'm sure Netanyahu's picking up the phone and screaming at him, "You're supposed to get them for us." And again, we can see with our own eyes, who is the aggressor, who's the warmonger. We'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about Iran, and we're talking about apparently Trump came very close to pulling out of the P5+1 deal, which would have opened the door to Iran on the basis of its mythical, hypothetical nuclear weapons program, the same excuse they used to go after Saddam Hussein and Iraq. But at the last second, Trump went ahead and recertified. But the propaganda is already gearing up. to convince us Iran is a huge and dangerous threat. And over at the New York Slimes, they had this article, Iran dominates in Iraq after U.S. handed the country over. Obviously, from the New York Slimes' point of view, we should never have let go. We worked hard to conquer that country. We should have kept it here. And their entire argument about Iran dominating in Iraq is if you walk into any market in Iraq, the shelves are filled with goods from Iran, milk, yogurt, and chicken, and so forth and so on. Well, I mean, they do share a common border. It's not like they have to pay the shipping to buy American products from halfway around the globe. And after all, after decades of war, brought down on their heads by the United States government, why would anyone in Iraq want to buy anything coming from the United States of America? The New York Slimes is out there with an absolutely fantastical piece of logic saying that the country of Iraq should be buying in American products. Instead, they're giving their money to Iran, and we know Iran will do nefarious things with it. And then they wonder why they're losing readership over there. Now, I mentioned earlier that Netanyahu is still facing this investigation into corruption in association with the deal to buy more of these German Dolphin-class submarines. And apparently Germany has said, we don't want to get tangled up in this, and they have indefinitely postponed the signing of a memorandum of understanding for the next 3 submarines. In other words, Israel is not going to be getting the submarines until this issue with Netanyahu and the corruption is settled. Now, down in Venezuela, it looks like the regime change the United States government has long lusted for is about to happen. And the U.S. is supporting the right-wing opposition in Venezuela against the socialist government of President Maduro. They've been after Venezuela all the way back to Hugo Chavez. And Venezuela has been subject to economic warfare, destabilization campaigns, the same pattern we've seen in so many other countries around the world. And Donald Trump has gone so far as to declare that he will take strong and swift economic actions if President Maduro goes ahead with plans to create a super legislature in Venezuela known as a Constituent Assembly. It's up for a referendum on July 30th. And so Trump is out there saying, we're going to do more bad things to you if you dare and change your government in a direction that we don't want it to go. And yes, in this area of global hegemonic domination, I am very disappointed. I thought Donald Trump understood that in the long run, this is going to be bad for the United States of America. They're on this plan that cannot be carried through to completion because sooner or later it will bring us into conflict with Russia and China, and we're not going to be able to win that one, even with the nuclear weapons. Now, we are seeing more and more signs over in South Korea. Their new president, Moon Jae-in, is trying to bridge the gap with North Korea. They're already going to have meetings about how to back down along the border to avoid the possibility of a mistake and a misunderstanding. Now they're talking about reunifying the country, at least with the rail systems. They're going to build these rail bridges over the demilitarized zone and start connecting the trains up. And Kim Jong-un has to understand this is going to be an economic lifeline to his country. It's going to make North Korea prosper. It's going to make him look really, really good. And that's what that whole sunshine policy was all about. Meanwhile, they're backing off all the saber rattling about North Korea in general. Apparently, the vice chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff came on out early today and said the reality is North Korea does not have the capacity to hit the United States with any degree of accuracy. He's saying, yes, some of their missiles, like the Taepodong 2, have the range. They can't hit the targets they're aiming at. And I certainly hope he's right. But you need to remember all that technology that was transferred into Chinese hands by Bill Clinton back in 1994. How much of that has now been finding its way over to North Korea? And in the age of GPS, building a navigation system that can hit a target with a circular error probability close to zero is relatively easy. Now, granted, you cannot take a civilian GPS and do it. Believe it or not, there's actually code in all those civilian GPS units in your smartphone. If it's traveling above a certain speed, it stops working, specifically so it cannot be used as a potential terror weapon. But anybody who's got any electronics engineers can build a GPS receiver that doesn't have that restriction. Now, the Navy has unveiled their first, in fact, the world's first active laser weapon. It's actually deployed on a U.S. Navy ship over in the Gulf region, and they put out a video. They gave CNN an exclusive preview or demonstration, and they launched a target drone at the ship, and the laser homed in on the wing and burned the wing off. And it looks really impressive, but that laser had to stay on the exact same portion of the wing for about 3 seconds before it started to burn through. And we're talking about a lightweight drone with lightweight materials, not something that's armored. So it's not an impact kill laser beam. It's not a pulse beam. And there lies its weakness, because we knew the latest generation of enemy threats aren't just going to fly in a straight line and let themselves be lased. They're going to be jinking, they're going to be moving, they're going to be spinning around, they're going to be going back and forth. I don't think this laser weapon is as effective against aerial targets as they like to claim. Boats in the water, yeah, you can get a good dwell on them. It's a long ways away from Star Wars, as it were. Now, apparently over in Russia, they're getting ready to make a new motion picture about Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. And incorporated into that script is some additional information probably most Americans don't have. Now, you're probably aware that there was a Russian ship that came and offered assistance to the Liberty, and the captain of the Liberty said, "Thank you, we cannot allow you on our ship because of all the goodies that we have here." But apparently the Russian ship just stayed there until the U.S. forces could arrive. And it was called Operation Cyanide. And apparently the presence of the Russian ship deterred a second effort to make sure the ship sunk. See, that was the goal. Israel was going to attack the USS Liberty. The Liberty was going to sink. They were going to blame it on Egypt. We'd all be off to war on Egypt on behalf of Israel. And we do know there was a submarine that was watching everything going on the surface, the USS Amberjack. And people have been wondering, why didn't the Amberjack try and intervene with the Israeli patrol boats? Why didn't they surface and brandish some guns or something? Well, according to this new information that will be coming out in this Russian movie, the Amberjack was standing by in case the Israeli attack failed to torpedo the Liberty and make sure it went to the bottom. And the only thing that stopped the Amberjack from doing that was the presence of the Russian warship. They knew if they fired the torpedo, the Russians would see what had happened and they would report it to the world. New little factor of the USS Liberty story that's just now coming to light here. All right, let's get on into the economic news here. And once again, the student loan problem is a problem. In fact, it's being described in this article over in my Budget 360 as the student loan tsunami. And it's on the horizon. And apparently, of $847 billion in direct loan program, only $535 billion is actually being paid back on. In other words, almost half of these loans are already in default and not being paid, because these kids got lured into college with grandiose promises of high-paying jobs after they graduated, with which they'd pay off those student loans in just a few years. And the jobs weren't there. Higher education, like so much else in this country, it's been turned into a racket. Just another racket to plunge people on that debt hook and turn them into debt slaves. Now, a little bit of good news here. Apparently, they've been playing games with those student loans similar to what they were doing with the mortgage-backed securities back in 2008. And apparently, there have surfaced some paperwork problems. And critical paperwork is missing. They're not able to find who actually owns the loan. Apparently, there was a lot of mass-produced documentation and even some robo-signing going on. like we saw in 2008, and judges have begun dismissing lawsuits by creditors against the students, basically wiping out their debt, because documents proving who owns the loans cannot be found. And we're looking at billions in private student loan debt may simply be wiped away, as much as $5 billion worth. And that would be a good thing, I think, for those students, because they got suckered. Let's be honest here. They got suckered. They signed those loan documents on the basis of false information given to them. You know, take this loan, get a college education, become an art history major, and you'll have a high-paying job. You'll be making six figures. You'll pay these loans back in 15, 20 years. And it didn't happen. It's another scam in a nation of scams. Under a government of the scammers, by the scammers, and for the scammers. And it's a problem everywhere. Apparently over in Great Britain, Corbyn had made a pledge to clear up the student debt problem during his campaign. And now they've done a U-turn on that one. And people are getting very, very angry. They're sick and tired of getting lied to every election season. Now, over at Wells Fargo, you probably remember Wells Fargo. Last year, they got in trouble for creating fake accounts on behalf of customers to churn them and charge fees. And now it's trying to kill a class action lawsuit over shady debit card fees. And there's another issue they're trying to keep a lid on. Well, it's basically called debit card reordering, because you can overdraw your checking account with the debit card the same as you can with a paper check. So let's say you have $100 in your bank account and you make three purchases costing $20, $30, and $110. Now, Wells Fargo will charge you a $35 overdraft fee for taking out more than you have in your account. But Wells Fargo has been reordering the transactions from highest to lowest, putting the biggest charge first so that they could then charge you with three separate overdraft fees instead of just the one. From the $20 one goes through, the $30 one goes through, only the $110 one triggers an overdraft fee. But Wells Fargo has been intentionally putting the largest one first so that the $20 and $30 ones then generate additional overdrafts totaling $70. Now, you multiply that by millions of customers, and you're talking about serious money. And we have seen reports before where there are some banks that are remaining solvent, literally relying on overdraft fees. The entire economy is being propped up by fraud and bad behavior here. Now, Donald Trump is out there negotiating priorities for NAFTA. Apparently, they're getting ready for a renegotiation of that. They're going to revamp the North American Free Trade Agreement with Canada and Mexico. And here's something I've always been wondering. If trade is really free, why do you need an agreement? Just trade. But these so-called free trade agreements are usually about mandating countries to buy certain classes of products. One of the reasons the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal floundered was that the deal included a ban on GMO labeling, and some of the other potential signatories to the Trans-Pacific Partnership are countries that already ban GMO or at least mandate labeling. And so they dug in their heels, and that was a big sticking point for that. So these really are not free trade deals, they're forced trade deals. Now, up in Alaska, their credit rating has now been downgraded for the second time in a week. Standard & Poor's has lowered Alaska's credit rating just as of today and said the problem is the state's reliance on financial reserves to fund its budget cannot continue. Now, Alaska gets a huge amount of its money from oil revenues, and they do have a huge cash surplus built up. But Standard & Poor's is out there saying the fact that they're using their cash buildup to balance the budget is not proper banking, and so they've lowered their rating. Moody's downgraded Alaska less than a week ago. And it almost seems less like Alaska's really in trouble and more like the ratings agencies are punishing Alaska for having a cash surplus when so few other states actually do. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Peter in Dallas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I came across something that I thought was very interesting and sort of put the behavior of liberals in focus for me. Have you ever heard of the critical theory from the Frankfurt School?
A little bit, yes.
Well, the whole idea is, I guess, in communist theory, you had the dialectic materialism, and that didn't seem to work out. The poor people fought all the poor people from other countries in all the world wars, so they came up with a new theory, which is called the critical theory, and basically the idea was for socialism to come into existence, you had to destroy the previous ideology, the previous culture,
yes,
or capitalism. So basically the idea went with this critical theory that you just attack anything, about the culture. I mean, it has nothing to do with creating anything. It's all about destruction. And this was, all these professors came over and went into our educational system, and it sort of, it seems to me what's going on now with all the liberals. There doesn't seem to be any discussion. There doesn't seem to be much need for discussion. It's just this idea that you attack everything about the society so that it can eventually fall, and then you can build a new one. So it just seemed to explain the behavior of the liberals to me, and I thought I'd just ask you about it.
Well, it is amazing how many of our college students say that they're in favor of socialism, and yet when you ask them, what is socialism and how does it work, most of them don't really have a good idea of what it is. I think a good explanation would be is that capitalism is a good system for a nation with plenty of resources, and socialism is perfect for a country where resources have become severely limited. And that is certainly true here in the United States. But it's true that anytime you want to impose a new social order, you do have to destroy the previous one. You have to sort of divorce the population from that old order. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Peter. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call. Terry in Oregon, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Terry, are you there? Okay, I guess not. So let's get on back to the news here. We're talking.
Here we go.
Terry, are you there? Terry, you're on the air. What's on your mind today?
Okay, I heard that when Johnson heard about the attack on the Liberty, he made a comment that said, "I want that ship on the bottom of the ocean." And I just want to know, did I hear you right when you said a submarine was standing by to sink the Liberty?
Well, that's the new information that's coming out in this movie about the Liberty that's being made in Russia. Now, the presence of the submarine had already been known, and everybody was saying, why did it not come to the aid of the Liberty? Now we're finding out it had a very good reason. It had entirely different orders. The entire thing was a false flag setup to drag the United States, to drag the American people into a war against Egypt on the side of Israel. And it was a major botch-up. And the crew of the Liberty, the first thing that the Israelis did when they attacked the ship is they shot up all the antennas. They were jamming the U.S. Navy's communication frequencies, which tells us right there Israel knew it was an American ship they were attacking. And they shot away the antennas, and one of the crew members was able to rig a jury rig replacement antenna, and they got a message out, we're under attack. And there was a nearby carrier group, I think it was the America, that launched a rescue mission. And Johnson had his SecDef get on the radio and say, you order those planes back. You get them on the deck. And then apparently they tried to launch a second rescue mission, and Johnson got on the phone and said, you keep those planes there. And when it came on out, it was Israel that was attacking the Liberty, and somebody said, what's going on? And the quote that you mentioned was part of a larger quote where Johnson said, I would rather see that ship on the bottom of the ocean than embarrass our ally in the Middle East. And again, it's an earlier version of 9/11.
Right. But, Mike, that was a U.S. submarine that was going to sink the Liberty, a U.S. Navy submarine is going to sink another U.S. Navy ship. And
yes.
Is that just in the movie, or is there some other documentation on that?
There appears to be some documentation on it, and again, the presence of the submarine was already known about. And everybody was wondering why they did not come to the aid of the USS Liberty. And now we have a really good reason. It makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Mike.
All right, you got it. We're going to switch over to Andy. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hi, Michael. Yeah, no, I think we have a serious problem in this country, and I think it's a major problem. It's called the usurping of our children. I learned certain things in school when I was growing up, and then I found out what they taught me was wrong.
Yes.
And then, up until about 6-8 years ago, I didn't even know that liberty existed. I didn't know that Lyndon B. Johnson said, "I want that GD ship at the bottom of the ocean." I didn't know any of this stuff.
No, the job of the school is to teach you what the government wants you to believe is real, just like corporate media, to control what you're thinking. Okay?
Well, and it works perfectly. It works perfectly
Not anymore. Stay on the line.
No, you're right.
Stay on the line. We got to do a station identification. I'm going to come right back to you after these few words. Volume up there. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking with Andy about the brainwashing of America, and yes, it has been very effective and powerful up to a point. And again, the emergence of the Internet and the independent media has broken that monopolistic control over what the American people think they know about the rest of the world. By giving them a choice, by giving them an option to go on out and get disparate points of view and decide for themselves, which, by the way, was the way the media was originally set up in this country. There were laws saying that no one entity, no one individual could own too much media. That would preserve a diversity of opinion so that the American people could read all the different points of view and make a good choice. And that's what Thomas Jefferson meant when he said it is the highest duty of every American to keep themselves fully informed so that they can make good choices. But today, between the government and the corporate media, you're fed the same storyline no matter where you turn. So inevitably you think, well, gee, this must be the reality of the world. I guess Saddam had nuclear weapons, and I guess humans are warming the world, and I guess vaccines are totally 100% safe, and so forth and so on. If there's one thing we can point to as a success in the independent media, we have taken away the government and the corporate media's ability to lie to the public with impunity. They can't do it anymore, and they're in a panic over that.
Well, sir, they actually had a really good plan together with this No Child Left Behind. And your commercial says it all. Where you're asking for people to help out the station and stuff. I mean, they've totally usurped our education. They did a really good job at it because they could calculate when a new generation was coming up, and then they could calculate what they're going to teach that new generation so that they would be all in line with what's going on. But here's a question for you, my friend. Is this a calculated risk on their part, or did they really mess up when they put the Internet together where information is flowing and you guys have made a big step up? Is this a calculated error on their part, or did they really mess up?
They really messed up because you need to understand that when the Defense Department's Advanced Research Projects Agency started putting together the early net, and it was called the ARPANET back then, and it was intended for government facilities, defense contractors, universities working on defense projects. It was not intended to be made available to the American people. And so it was developing, and of course these are back in the days of FTP and the early email and UUCP and a bunch of stuff like this, long before the World Wide Web. And then over time, as defense contractors went into private life and university students graduated and moved on, they all wanted to maintain that connection with the ARPANET, and so they would set up feeds and forwarding into their home, and it began to spread and spread. And then in the mid-1970s, the government became very alarmed that the ARPANET was becoming available to the public, and so they came on in. The government, DARPA, had been funding the backbone that was driving the whole thing, and they came on in and they said, okay, we're going to give you the checks to fund the backbone, but there's a new set of rules. Only people authorized by us will be allowed to access the ARPANET. People who leave your employment or graduate from your school will not be allowed to come on in and take access of it. And to a man, all of the corporations running the background said, you can keep your check, we'll fund it ourselves from now on. And that was the day the ARPANET became the Internet, and in hacker lore, it's called the Great Revolt. And that was when the genie got out of the bottle, and they have never been able to find a way to put it back on in.
So essentially, at this particular point, we really got them by the gonads here because they messed up. They screwed the pooch, so to speak.
Well, it got away from them. It got away from them. They weren't able to exert their control. And now we have a peer-to-peer, citizen-to-citizen communication system. We have a collective memory and communication that is outside of government control, although they're trying to reassert that. And yes, it has resulted in the American people coming to understand the extreme degree to which we've all been lied to all of our lives. We're the most lied to people on the face of the earth. And that revelation, that understanding by the American people, is another parallel with what we were seeing in the Soviet Union shortly before it collapsed, when the Soviet people were starting to share information peer-to-peer on fax machines on a system that was called the samizdat. And even with something as primitive as fax machines, the credibility of the Central Soviet government was very quickly undermined as their lies became exposed, and eventually it came crashing down. We're on that same path right now.
Well, they got a head start on this, though, because we've got what we call these millennials now, or the snowflakes or whatever, so they got a real big head start on us. So these people have to be convinced that you've been lied to. What you learned in school is not true. The college education you got is not going to get you a job. None of this stuff is true. None of this is factual. So they've got a head start on us. So we do have a lot of work ahead of us. I'm just so glad RBN's around. And you know what? People, donate to this radio station. You need to fund these people. They're doing the right thing. Thank you very much, Mike.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words and for the request for donations, because you all need to understand something. Nobody involved in independent media is getting rich doing this. We're here because we're trying to avoid World War III. We're here because we refuse to live under a government that lies to us. We do this because we're very concerned that our next generation, our children, we want them to grow up in a government that is forced to be truthful and honest with them so that they can make those good choices. All right, we're going to do another shout-out to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network, and we're going to go back to the phones. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Just heard your piece on the Liberty and the new revelation of the submarines' orders to sink the Liberty, and as you might imagine, I'm pretty well versed in that. I too knew about the submarine. Always wondered. I kind of wondered. I didn't wonder in a sense, because if there's both torpedo boats and aircraft flying overhead, it might not be easy for a submarine to intervene very much. But it makes all the sense in the world that they would be asked to sink that ship, and it enrages me. Every time I think about McCain and Admiral Geist and all this chain of command, McNamara, Lyndon Johnson, Abe Fortas, all these people who are in on this, who were willing to kill out of a crew of 230, roughly 200 dead and wounded, and shut it up for years and years. And they're willing to, as a military man, when you're willing to overlook an attack on your own people, you lose your own people, that is the most heinous thing that you could do.
Roosevelt did that here at Pearl Harbor. I mean, he set up those old used-up ships and all those sailors, to be killed in the Japanese attack to anger the American people into supporting a declaration of war against Japan, which in effect was a declaration of war against Nazi Germany.
You're exactly right. And Mike, I think I sent you something today that I think you posted on how the neocons are now reemerging on the Democratic side and pushing for a war with Russia. And I want to tell everybody out there, we wouldn't be in Syria now without these Zionist, Israel first neocons. And now we're nose to nose with the Russians. They don't care anything about us. It's all for Israel. and I'm sick to death of it. We've got to root these freaking people out no matter what it takes.
Well, again, I want to pull back and remind everybody that world-changing events like wars and assassinations never happen for just one reason. History will say it was just one reason. They did this, crazed lone nut assassin. But what happens is you'll get all of these different individuals and groups who have their own particular agenda, but they all overlap in that the solution to their problem is a specific event. And they all get together and say, well, let's all make this happen because we're going to help all of our agendas. It's like the Kennedy assassination. There were different interests in there. There was the Federal Reserve that was opposed to his Executive Order 11110. You had the Texas oil billionaires who hated Kennedy over the oil depletion allowance. You had organized crime, which had helped Kennedy win the election and felt betrayed when Robert Kennedy went on his war on organized crime. You had the CIA, which felt Kennedy had betrayed them at the Bay of Pigs. And you had, of course, Israel, which wanted Kennedy out and Johnson in because Kennedy opposed Israel getting nuclear weapons. Johnson was fully on board with letting Israel have nuclear weapons. And so everybody had a slightly different reason for seeing something happen, but they all agreed we're going to make it happen. And that's really how these things come about. It's to say that there's only one reason for a war or assassination to happen. That's for public consumption. That's for the TV shows and the comic books. It's not the real world. And all right, Peter, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Don in Iowa. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine.
Okay. This this USS Liberty. I first heard about it. There's a website. I don't know if you want me to. It's okay to say a website.
Yes.
321 Gold is the name of the website. I don't know if you're familiar with it. The guy. It's a gold investing website, but the guy also is an advocate about this USS Liberty. He was in the Marines in Vietnam, and a pretty interesting character. But outside of that, as far as what's going to make America go down, I think that this Illinois bankruptcy is one. It's another thing that the
Don, are you there? Okay, I think we lost Don. All right, going on back to Peter in Los Angeles and the USS Amberjack, which was the submarine that was there apparently observing Israel's attack on the USS Liberty through their periscope. And by the way, some of the crewmen on the Liberty reported seeing a periscope, and they were told, oh, you were just stressed, it was your imagination, blah, blah, blah. And the idea about if there's aircraft overhead, what could the submarine do? Well, just by surfacing would have said, there's a witness here to Israel's attacking the USS Liberty, one that you can't sink, because we can just sink and get away from you that way. And Amberjack did not even do that. And it took a lot of years before confirmation of the Amberjack being there came on out. And so with this new information that is coming out of this film production in Russia, now we understand. It makes perfect sense. Amberjack would have remained hidden. It was basically there as a backstop in case Israel did not succeed in destroying the Liberty with their little tiny patrol craft and airplanes, which they didn't, as a matter of fact. And the only reason the Amberjack didn't fire a torpedo at the Liberty was because of the presence of the Russian warship, which just stayed next to the Liberty until the U.S. forces could arrive. Like I said, it's an earlier version of 9/11. They've been doing it all along. If you go over to my website, up at the top of the page in the gray box below the banner, there's a bunch of articles I like to keep up there for people to look at. And there's one called Of the Liars, By the Liars, and For the Liars, and it is simply a list throughout history of all the times rulers have lied to their own people for whatever purposes. It goes all the way back to Ramses the Great in Egypt. It is not unusual when a government pulls a dirty trick on its own people to get what they want. It's business as usual. It's what they do. And you need to understand that. Alrighty, so the phone lines are open right now. Let's get on back to the economic news here. Story coming out of the Express in Great Britain. The Eurozone is on the rocks. Apparently inflation is plunging. The ECB is scrambling, trying to save the EU economy. And again, you need to understand the dynamics of a private central bank that issues all of the public currency as a loan at interest. It is naturally unstable because it creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt until the debt crushes the system, which is exactly what's going on. Whoever wanted to set up the European Union created it with a built-in self-destruct device called the European Central Bank. And I used to think that the abuses of the ECB would tear the European Union apart eventually, and it's certainly contributing, but right now it looks like the refugee crisis is taking the lead in fracturing the European Union. Now, the Bank of Italy has issued a warning not to create your own currency. Because after all, it's up to the banks are allowed to create currency out of thin air, not you. And what is going on in Italy right now is something that we have seen in other places throughout history where the economy has become really, really hard under the predations of the bankers. People do start creating their own currency. And there's one circulating around Italy and starting to spread called scriptural euros. And these are euros issued by the citizens themselves under a theory of autonomous creation of currency based on the idea of collective property of money. It's not counterfeiting. They're not trying to defraud anybody with it. They're simply saying we're creating a new medium of exchange. And during the Depression, we saw American towns issue their own internal currency, and it worked just fine. During the Civil War, when the Union was counterfeiting the Confederate currency to try and destroy it, towns within the Confederacy started creating their own internal currencies, and it worked. And apparently this scriptural euro is starting to take off. People are using it to engage in trade. And at the bottom of it is this idea. If the banks are allowed to create money out of thin air, why can't we? Makes perfect sense to me here. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, I'm going through my archives of articles here as I'm purging, getting ready to move out of California. And I've come across an article here, and if you could educate me a little bit more on Buto, it definitely was an assassination government-sponsored. Could you tell me what she might have been working on, what was going on at the time that they decided to take her out?
Oh, I think it was a classic case of regime changing. She was taking her country into a more socialist model. And you need to understand, people throw around that word socialist rather recklessly. It's used as a pejorative, but it really comes down to two models of governing a nation. And in one, the rulers of a nation take the wealth of the nation and spend it on the people of the nation. And then you have the other model, which is the rulers take the money from the people of the nation and they spend it on themselves and their friends. The latter one being what we have here in the United States of America. The former we had in Venezuela under Hugo Chavez. And, of course, the nations that are enslaved to private central banks don't like that first model. They don't like any government that is spending a nation's wealth on the people of that nation. They want that wealth for themselves. And Buto was kind of leaning in that direction. And the other reason they might have decided to take her on out was she was at the forefront of people saying that Osama bin Laden was dead at the same time the American corporate media were still waving around these phony bin Ladens, and you could even see that the beard was fake. And he magically kept getting younger and younger in each new appearance and incarnation. And Buto was out there saying, yeah, he died of natural causes in December of 2001. And every bin Laden after that was a manufactured fake. And that was probably another reason they wanted to take her out, because people were listening to her because of her position.
Well, yeah, I also remember that Madeleine Albright had also confirmed that also. They died of renal failure, kidney failure sometime in 2001 also. But, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's rather amazing. You're welcome. It's rather amazing. In late 2001, it was in the media that Osama bin Laden was dead. Fox News even reported it. And then the U.S. government said, no, we still need the arch villain to justify all these wars. So he is risen from the grave. Osama bin Laden, the zombie, is coming forth. And we had all of this until that when too many people knew that the real Osama was dead and the others were fake. So they killed some poor guy over in Abbottabad and said, yes, we finally got Osama bin Laden. And that was that here. Getting on back to the economic news, the European Central Bank is considering a special assessment of Deutsche Bank's two largest shareholders. Apparently, there's something going on in Deutsche Bank that the ECB feels they need to look into. And we know Deutsche Bank, like so many of these other banks, has been caught up in all kinds of skullduggery, manipulations, a lot of strange deaths among Deutsche Bank people, a lot of very strange deaths and suicides. And the ECB is finally saying, we're going to take a look at these two shareholders because we think something funny may be going on there. I had a very good friend who worked for Deutsche Bank who is no longer with us, and I miss him greatly here. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're still talking about the economic news. Now, everybody's been talking about the cashless society, and, of course, the bankers want the cashless society. They don't want you to be able to actually put your own money in your own pocket and walk out the door out of their control. They want to head off the possibility of a bank run because when the bank starts collapsing and you go pound on the door and say, give me my savings account, they're going to say, how? There's no cash. All I can do is move it to another bank. We'll then send it on back here. And there are a lot of people who do not like the idea of a cashless society. We don't like the idea of being made totally dependent, forced to be dependent on the bankers, because enforced dependency is slavery. And we have already documented a lot of cases where these computer systems that handle these plastic cards have broken down, resulting in people who have money in their bank account not being able to buy food for their family. It is not a perfect system. Well, one of the first places they decided to test a cashless society was over in India, and it turned into an epic disaster because the Indian people simply avoided any stores or facilities that were running on a cashless system. They just wouldn't go in there in the first place. And I understand that. They start going cashless here, I'm not going to get involved. We've had a couple of local places that have gone cashless. We don't go in there anymore. We're just not going to do it. All right, let's take a phone call. Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, this is Mario. Mario from the Netherlands. Well, I have a remark regarding that news coming from Italy that the Italian Central Bank is advising citizens not to create their own currency.
Yes.
Well, you see, many politicians survive a lot of scandals regarding pedophilia or financial fraud or whatever. They survive and they're always coming back. But remember Silvio Berlusconi?
Yes.
This guy was ready in the summer of 2012 to introduce the Italian euro. He threatened the ECB to create own Italian euros and to compensate for the lack of consistency of the ECB policies. Well, they found some call girls who witnessed those punga parties of Silvio Berlusconi, and he was removed from power.
Yes.
The story is the same. Don't make your own money. Even the boss of a government wasn't allowed to do that.
Oh, those owners of the private central bank, they have got the globe in their hands, and they will not let go. I mean, that's the whole point of my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. The ultimate rulers of this planet are those who have given themselves the ability and the right to create the money out of thin air and loan it to us at interest, and we are all suckers and fools for going along with it.
Michael, I'm sorry, but we are in agreement. But
okay.
I'm very sorry for the situation.
All right. Well, listen, thank you very much for that. We're going to let you go here, coming up on another commercial break. Couple of stories here. Harley-Davidson is having to lay off some of their people. Earnings are falling from weak U.S. sales because Americans just don't have money. Ordinary Americans, we're out of money. We're tapped out. The whole point of the Federal Reserve was to suck all the wealth out of the people's pockets and put it in the pockets of the bankers, and nobody had a plan of what to do when they succeeded. And now the retail sector is collapsing all over the place. IBM has reported their 21st consecutive quarter of lower revenues. And auto loan defaults are now soaring. Those are all negative indicators. Now, there is a $2 billion private equity fund was being managed by Houston-based Evernest. And investors put in $2 billion, and then it had to borrow another $1.3 billion, and now it has collapsed almost to zero. This is the largest private equity fund collapse. And the people who invested their money in this, they'll be lucky to get pennies on the dollar of their money back. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. And I'm watching on the Fox News feed, and they're talking about how Trump has recertified the Iran nuclear deal, the P5+1, but they're going to hit Iran with yet more sanctions over Iran's missile program, which was never part of the P5+1 deal. And if Iran gives up its intermediate-range missiles, then it'll be the short-range missiles. Then it'll be the artillery. Then it'll be the Nerf guns. They're trying to whittle away Iran's defenses to make it easier to invade. The last sanctions didn't bring Iran to heel. Iran had nothing to give up. They didn't actually have a nuclear program. Iran went along with a P5+1 deal so that the U.S. would lift the sanctions over Iran's non-existent nuclear program. And Iran is in compliance, according to the Aiea, and the United States never lifted those sanctions, and now they've thrown more sanctions on there. And what this is going to do is drive Iran even further into the Russia-China sphere of influence. I swear they got to be on prescription antidepressants over there in Washington, D.C., or there's got to be lead in the drinking water like down in Flint, Michigan, because they're not thinking these things through one bit. Now, a little bit of good news for those of you invested in gold. Gold has just hit a 3-week high. Actually, what's going on is the dollar is eroding, and now we're finding out that Russia and China are settling accounts on the Shanghai Exchange in gold. They've dropped the dollar. The dollar is dead in Russia and China at this point. Everything the U.S. does to try and regain global hegemonic domination of the world's economy under the U.S. Federal Reserve note is, in fact, accelerating the world away. And they don't see it. That Pentagon report we talked about yesterday is bang spot on. The United States is a failing empire. And it failed for much the same reasons as Rome did. The corruption of the ruling class. The unbridled greed. I don't think there's any way to turn it around, even with a world war. World War is just going to finish it off. We have to start planning on the new country we are going to be building in this land when this one is finished with its death rattle, as it were. Over in Great Britain and Brussels, they're still trying to figure out some way that they can undo the Brexit, at least economically, if not totally. And now, apparently, there's a new claim coming from the Hinkley Point C nuclear power station, where the EDF is now claiming compensation, totaling to 22 billion with a B pounds sterling. EDF is a French energy company, and they got involved in Great Britain because of the EU, and now that Great Britain is leaving, they're saying, well, we're going to sue. More refugees on the way to the promised land in Europe, emboldened by Merkel's refusal to put any kind of a cap on the refugees coming into Germany, and the German people do not like it. And there's been yet another very unpleasant incident. This was at the Volksfest, the People's Fair, in Schorndorf, Baden-Württemberg state. A 20-year-old Iraqi man and 3 Afghan asylum seekers have been arrested as suspects in the sexual assault of people at this German music festival. And apparently the situation got out of control, and as many as 1,000 people, refugees, were hurling bottles at the riot police who were trying to take these suspects in. All right, let's take some phone calls. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Kevin, are you there? I can't hear you, Kevin.
You know?
I hear you now.
All right. How's Bizarro World?
I don't know. Bizarro World is looking very calm and collected compared to the one we're living in.
All right. I have a couple questions. I hear you always talking about, and I agree when you talk about the collapse, the Soviet-style collapse. I want to know what that will look like to your average everyday person as this is going to happen and the aftermath after it happens. Are we going to, I'm sure we need to prepare, with storable food and everything, but how crazy is it going to actually get?
Well, again, going back to the model of the Soviet Union, the one good thing about the way the Soviet Union collapsed is it was relatively calm and very little bloodshed, and I'd like to see that here in the United States. It's all going to come down to how many people are still on the side of that federal government and how violent they're willing to be to try and recapture the country for themselves. So it's very, very difficult to say, but again, we all need to be prepared because it will be a very rough 3 to 4 months while the nation tries to come back together. And now is the time to be building up networks of connections that do not go through the computers. In other words, your friends, your neighbors, start building a sense of community, start learning what each other does because there's probably going to be a lot of bartering of skills. Hey, if you'll fix my car, I'll come in and fix your computer, that kind of a thing going on. Again, those pre-1964 silver American coins, what's called the junk silver, those are recognized units of value that'll probably suffice for money because people won't be taking those paper Federal Reserve notes anymore. Because there's nothing backing them except the slave labor of the American people, and with the federal government gone, nobody can enforce that slave labor. So it's going to be a lot of confusion. I would hope that in their wisdom and prudence that state governments are already making contingency plans on what they're going to do if the federal U.S. government collapses. And
how do we you on air?
I'm sorry?
When this happens. How do we keep you on air during this and while all this is going on? Because I have a feeling that, while this happens, they're going to censor, and shut down and push, the government narrative that everything's fine. How do we go around that?
If the federal government collapses, they're not going to have the means to do anything. That's going to be the whole point of it all. And I'm sure as they get closer and closer, silencing the Internet isn't going to do anything because the Internet and the independent media, we're not the problem. Corrupt, hopelessly corrupt, greedy rulers are the problem. And I'm sure that they understand that. They're at war with each other, not with us as much. But if it starts to come apart and fragment, I think you're going to see them bail on out. They're going to grab what they can of their wealth and they're going to head for places without extradition.
And we shouldn't allow them to leave places with extradition. They should be accountable for the crimes they've committed here.
They should be, but you know something? I'll be very happy if they just leave. If they just leave the country and they go and fine, you got your wealth, live to a ripe old age and learn knitting or something. My focus, should that happen, and I do think it's a distinct possibility, my focus is going to be on minimizing the damage to the American people and this nation and trying to guide us through to the creation of a new government based on those original constitutional principles all the way up to at least the 13th Amendment. And basically go back to that model. The states are sovereign, independent entities, and the federal government is deliberately weak and serves only as an arbiter between the states and has no authority within the states themselves. We go back to that model.
Do you think Trump can handle the collapse of the federal government? Do you think that
no, he'll be
he's the right person?
No, he'll be identified too strongly with it. If I had to pick a known politician that I would want to see handling the aftermath of the collapse, that would have to be Dr. Ron Paul.
I agree with you. And thank you for answering my questions, Mr. Mike. I'm not going to take up any more of your time.
All right,
and have a great show. Awesome show.
All right, thanks very much here. And by the way, let's get Cynthia McKinney into there as well. Start making up the list of who we want to bring back in to handle the creation of a new civil government. Dr. Ron Paul, Cynthia McKinney, a handful of others, and the rest we just tar and feather and run out of town on a rail. Let's go back to the phones. Don in Iowa, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Don, are you there?
I'm here, yeah, but I keep hearing these beeps. But before I got shut off, so hopefully I won't get shut off this time. I don't know why. But some of the things that happen is the bad stuff that's happening in this country. Some of the states are starting to go bankrupt. Illinois is probably headed straight to bankruptcy.
Yes.
What I've been reading about it, they don't have. They're trying to. They raise taxes drastically, but once you get downgraded to junk bond, I think they're still one step above junk bond. Once they get downgraded to junk bond, that shuts off a lot of the investors that can't. They're required by regulation not to invest in the Illinois bonds anymore. That'll put up over.
It's a problem, and there's a lot of states that are in trouble here, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that if the ordinary people are being forced to take lower and lower paying jobs, then obviously they're paying less and less in tax revenue, and raising taxes to compensate doesn't really work as well. You reach a point where people just say, I'm not going to work. Why should I work? The government is taking everything. I'm just going to sit at home and try and go on welfare. People can be completely dispirited by too much taxation. And above all of it, there's something else that's been going on most Americans are not aware of. As you know, the federal government debt is wildly out of control. It's much higher than the officially admitted to government debt. And over the last couple of decades, what the federal government has been doing is taking tax revenues in from the states and returning less and less of it, leaving these states with unfunded mandates to deal with. And they did this in order to transfer a huge chunk of the federal government debt back onto the states. And many of those states did not have robust enough economies to be able to support and service that debt. And so the federal government is dragging the state governments down with it as well. And the state governments need to wake up and realize that is a big reason why they're all in trouble. By the way, one of the articles that's on the main page of what really happened is a list of how states are doing fiscally in terms of the best and the worst. And Hawaii's right there in the middle, which is kind of weird because we've been hearing talk about possible bankruptcy for our state. Because due to TSA abuses, our tourism has really suffered from that. The Tourism Authority likes to say that we have an 80% occupancy rate in our hotels and resorts. What they don't talk about are all the hotels and resorts that have simply closed and gone away and they're boarded up. And so, we're all hurting out here.
I'm sure that really hurts Hawaii because the only way to get there is by airplane. They can't just get in your car and drive to Hawaii.
No, you can't. Go drive a quarter mile, come up for air, drive a quarter mile, come up for air, drive a quarter mile, come up for air.
But, Illinois is, I think, the sixth largest state, and that's a big state. The only thing we've had recently, we've had Detroit, we've had some cities go bankrupt. Detroit, I think Stockton, California, but, and now Puerto Rico is a territory. I guess are they bankrupt or they're almost bankrupt or something?
They're hovering on the edge there, and I can almost imagine, given that we have a government that has been lying to us about the unemployment numbers and the rate of inflation numbers and rigging the stock market, we might have states that technically qualify as being in bankruptcy, and they're not admitting it.
Right. Well, when that happens, though, then the other nations, the other investors all over the world, they pay attention to that. Wait a minute. Big state.
I think a lot of foreign investors are already getting out of the United States. They're propping the whole mess up with more instant money out of the Federal Reserve, which means technically, ultimately, the Federal Reserve will hold title to the entire country, which it's not supposed to. But it is a mess, and there's no way to fix. The only way to fix it is do what Andrew Jackson did. Just shut down that private central bank, write off all the debt as having been created through collusion and fraud, and just reset the system. And that is the only thing that is going to prevent a collapse.
If Ron Paul would have got the nomination, but you saw what happened. They totally wouldn't let him win the states that he won. I mean, it was rigged against Ron Paul.
Of course it was rigged against Ron Paul because he's a threat to those private central bankers. He's still pushing for a full and complete audit of the Federal Reserve, and it does make a lot of sense. This is the bank that supposedly controls our entire nation's currency, and we, the people, have a right to know what's going on inside there. Certainly we have a right to know how much money they have made off of us during the last 100 years, and I can imagine it's a rather tidy sum.
Well, all we can do is just hope for the best, and like you say, if it does go down, hopefully we won't all get killed anyway. So that'll be the good thing about it.
Well, that's, again, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was that one attempt at a counter-revolution, counter-coup, try and reassert the old hardliners, and it did involve a little bit of bloodshed, but not much. We didn't have fighting in the streets all across the country. And I would very much like to have a similar dearth of national violence in the coming transition. And that's certainly what I'm going to be working for. I would have preferred to avoid this. I would have preferred to avoid a world war. I'm having to accept that those are going to happen despite my best efforts. And now my focus is on how do we minimize the amount of damage, displacement, and upset on the ordinary people of the United States. Because after all, none of this is their fault. You, the people of the United States of America, didn't do anything to deserve any of this. It was done to you by people who are so greedy, they literally cannot see anything beyond that next fix of incoming coin and paper. That's where we are.
I think part of the problem, though, is just the low mental. Overall, the American people are not very smart. I mean, if you look as a whole, there's some smart people, obviously. You look at it as a whole, they just are too lazy to even learn how to read. And
well,
stuff like that.
It's not laziness. It's not laziness. It's literally a case of an intentional dumbing down of the population to keep us from thinking about what the government is doing. It's designing an education system that is more about indoctrination and rote memorization and repeating. Schools do not teach our kids how to be excited about learning. They don't teach our kids how to think and analyze and reason logically. Because people who can think and analyze and reason logically are a serious threat to the power structure.
All right. Okay, well, I'll let you go, Mike. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to start with Bob in Florida, but Bob, I'm going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Yo, what's good, Mike? How you doing, homie?
Doing okay.
True that. Listen, 3 things on my mind. Beans, bullets, and Band-Aids. Everything else, surface level symptomatic pussification nonsense. I'm getting ready, brother. I'm getting ready. How about you? You stocking up? You getting that garden ready? What you doing?
Yeah, we're Claire and I are kind of closet preppers here, and we have more than a closet. And,
come out the closet, brother. Come out the closet.
No, we have been making preparations a little bit over time, and obviously I'm not going to be on the front lines anywhere, but we have some storable food and water and shortwave radio and all kinds of things like that there. All right, Bob, I'm going to go ahead and
Aloha.
I'm going to let you go. Take a break for commercials. Back with another phone call. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take another phone call. Kathleen in Paris. Aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today? Kathleen, are you there? We seem to be having a problem getting our phone connections working. Kathleen in Paris, are you there? Okay, I guess we lost her. All righty. Getting on back to, before we do the immigration issue, I just saw this story. One of our members posted it at the website. Hawaii's Senator Mazie Hirono, she's a Democrat, apparently in an interview said that she gets all of her information about Republican senators from watching CNN. Boy, talk about an absence of due diligence. It's amazing. All right, back to, let's see. Okay, Kathleen in Paris, are you there? I'm still not hearing Kathleen. Oh, we lost her. All right. Okay. Poland has appealed to the European Court against the imposed obligation to accept more migrants as part of the EU relocation scheme. They're all digging in their heels. They've had enough of it. The sexual harassment, the rapes, the crime, the rioting, the refugees demanding that the countries of Europe start looking like the countries they came from. Here's a good one. Cultural enrichment at its finest. This is over in Pennsylvania, where apparently Romanian gypsies have been placed as part of the refugee program. And apparently they have some interesting habits, such as defecating in the streets and beheading live chickens where it can be seen, and the local residents are just really upset with all of this. And the issue seems to be not that the Romanians don't know the American customs, they're not interested. They want to continue to live the way they did in their home countries. And again, I'm in agreement with Teddy Roosevelt. If you want to come to this country, come on in. You are welcome. Once you're past the vetting, make sure you're not a criminal and carrying a contagious disease. But remember, you're in a new country. You're in the United States of America. We have certain laws and codes of behavior that you are expected to comply with. We have a language. It's called English. And what you do in your own home is your own business. But you don't come into our country and demand that we become the country you just ran away from. If you like that country so much, please go back. Because this is our country, and it is the way we who have lived here for generations want it to be. Now, late in 2015, there was this Syrian who got a job at a hairdressing studio, Mohammed Hussein Bashwani. And he was hailed in the media as the paramount example of successful integration of the refugees into German life. And apparently he just slit his female employer's throat. We're going to take a break for station identification. When we come on back, we're going to go back to that story of the Minneapolis cop who shot this bride-to-be. The story is just getting worse and worse and worse. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we have Kathleen in Paris finally back on the line. Aloha, Kathleen. What is on your mind today?
Hi. Aloha to you, too. Well, a couple of things, and they're both kind of big, but it was on the topic we were talking about before, credit cards, number one, and everybody's in debt. And I just think that when, it's all going to start falling down, why do we keep paying those credit cards to these illegal, immoral banks? Just stop it.
Well, if everybody stopped at the same time, it would definitely all come crashing down here.
Anyway.
But again, the system is set up to turn us all into debt slaves. And from the point of view of the bankers, they may see themselves as the good guys, as a force for the organization of the human capital to keep us going in a unified direction to serve the elites. But like any system of organization, it can quickly cross a line into abuse and repression and oppression, and that's where we are.
That's where we are. So I think we should stop paying our credit cards. The next point is pretty big. I watched a piece about the Russian Revolution and the crash. And pretty important in that was when their military refused their orders.
Yes. We could see that here. We could see that here. Certainly the military high command is all on board with this "let's make war on the world" thing because it means more promotions and money and kickbacks for them. But the ordinary rank and file military in this country are very disenchanted with what's going on. They understand none of these wars are moral. None of these wars are actually protecting the United States of America. Like Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler, they understand it's just a racket. They're going on out and using force of arms to force other countries into the control of large corporations.
Yeah, so I think that all of us who know somebody in the military should talk to them seriously about this refuse your orders. They're illegal and immoral orders, and we're not obliged to obey them.
You're absolutely right. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, rank and file military are not obligated to follow an illegal, immoral order. Of course, part of the basic training is to brainwash you into unquestioning obedience. And do you remember Lieutenant Aaron Watada? This came out some years ago where he basically refused to deploy back to Iraq, saying that the war in Iraq was illegal, and citing that portion of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He says, I have a right to refuse what is clearly an illegal, immoral order. And boy, did they pound on him. They wanted to make an example out of him. Don't you dare tell us what the law and the rules say. You just do as you're told. And he stood firm, And we had his father on the show here for an interview, and I got to talk to him when he made a presentation. In fact, I even made a video of the presentation. It's over at my YouTube page. And he's a man of rare courage, and we need more people of courage like that. But again, many years ago when they did that combat arms survey for the Marine Corps, and the Marines all said, yes, we would shoot on American citizens who refused to surrender their guns. And I got to talk with one of the Marines afterwards, and they said, we were just told that's the answer the bosses wanted. But no, in point of fact, Marines, like most rank-and-file military, they're strict constitutionalists, and no, they're not going to kill their fellow American citizens over the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms.
Okay. Well, anyway, most of us know somebody in the military, so we should be talking to them.
We absolutely should, because more and more people who are in the military, on military bases, you want to talk about the censorship we're seeing out here. It's much, much worse on those military bases. They are not being allowed to see anything that would lead them to question the orders and policies that are being fed to them by their chain of command. All right, Kathleen, we're going to let you go, and we're going to take Frank in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, Michael, thank you for taking my phone call, and I agree with you what's happening in that small city in Pennsylvania where they're bringing in these diverse cultures that cannot assimilate. And in truth, Michael, for the last 50-plus years, since the 1965 Immigration Act, multiculturalism and diversity has been a total failure for the United States, and that is the truth. And anybody that's over 60 will understand that when this country was predominantly European, we were on to doing great things for our nation. We were working in the national interest for the betterment of this country. Today, with multicultural and diversity, you have actual communities, like, say, Southern California, that are predominantly Spanish-speaking, Middle California, predominantly Asiatic-speaking, and Northern is predominantly English. Nobody's getting along. It's tearing this country apart, multiculturalism. And if you look at monolithic societies, like in Asia, for example, in Japan and China, and you look at the wonderments that they have developed over the past 50 years, like their monorail system, you can sit in a monorail system with a cup of coffee, and you can go 160 miles an hour and not have that coffee shake. That's how advanced they are in technology. You try that on one of our national highways here, it'll coffee be all over your lap. We are losing, Mike, with this multicultural diversity. The biggest lie the media told us is that this is our strength. It is not our strength. When you have groups of people that cannot communicate and will not assimilate into the national fabric of this society, we're heading for big trouble. And this is where this country is headed, Michael.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. And again, the goal here is not multiculturalism, but the erasure of any sense of culture at all, or identity or history, to make us easier to control, because we won't have a strong sense of who we are. People with a strong sense of self are harder to control. And maybe that's a reason why all of a sudden it's open season on white Europeans, because we do have a strong sense of who we are, where we came from, who our ancestors were, and all of a sudden we're finding ourselves under attack. They're trying to tear down white people from universities. They're saying that you shouldn't use research produced by white people in any future studies, which is, again, the parallels with the Nazi book burning, to erase any science created by Jewish authors like Einstein. The parallels are very, very obvious. Anyway, Frank, I'm going to let you go here. I got some news I got to cover here. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network. And I want to talk again about that tragedy up in Minneapolis, because we're starting to get a clearer picture of what's going on. So basically, there was this young lady, Justine Demond. She was from Australia. She was living in the United States. She was 1 month away from her wedding. She was a yoga teacher, natural healer. That was her job. Just an absolute perfect human being. And she thought she heard a noise outside her home, and she calls 911, and a Minneapolis police car shows up. And Officer Matthew Harity was in the driver's side, and Officer Mohammed Noor was sitting in the passenger seat. And the story that's coming out now is Justine Demond came up to the police car to talk to the driver, Matthew Harity, and talking about the noise she heard. And then all of a sudden, with no warning and no reason apparently, Mohammed Noor just drew his service revolver, reached across the driver, and shot Justin DeMond right there at the window of the cop car. She's standing there in her pajamas. She's not a threat. Obviously, Matthew Harity didn't think she was a threat. You know, and he's saying he's stunned. He has no idea why this happened. And that's going to lead to a couple of questions on my part. First of all, prescription antidepressants. I want to know if this Mohammed Noor was on prescription antidepressants. Because right now, that seems to be about the only thing that would explain this bizarre behavior. He's just sitting there. His partner is talking to the young lady, and he just pulls his gun, reaches across his partner, and shoots her in the stomach point blank. Kills her. Now, the Minneapolis police are trying to put out a new story saying, well, there may have been fireworks going off in the area, and Noor thought that it was this girl trying to shoot them, which is very weak indeed, especially when you consider that fireworks are illegal in that state. I think it's prescription antidepressants, coupled with all this police training by these Israeli security services, which are teaching the American police to treat the U.S. citizen the way the IDF treats the Palestinians. And this is just horrific beyond belief. All right, we're going to take a couple more phone calls. Rick in Arizona, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, yeah, as far as that shooting goes, her name is Diamond, not Damone. And I remember the day that guy was... Okay, what?
I'm sorry, it was spelled Damone in the article I was cutting it out of. Okay.
The first article is Diamond. They switched it because she's Jewish. Anyways, I saw the video. Her son right away said, we got to retrain these police. So I would hold my breath on this. This may be a false flag. Don't be so sure that this thing is real. There's no tears in the video in anybody's eyes, not her son and not the lady that was going to lead the march.
Hang on a second. You're not going to, the white population, especially the Jewish population, they don't rise up and riot in the streets and throw trash cans through the windows. So I don't see what they hope to.
For real, first. I know, Mike. I'm just saying I would just hold your breath a little bit on this story.
No, I think, again, I want to know if this guy was on prescription antidepressants.
Why does Republic Broadcasting always parrot the media? I mean, isn't this supposed to be the truth channel?
Yeah, I think the truth is that we need to be looking at how dangerous these prescription antidepressants are, because they've been involved in all these mass shootings that are going on. If you go over to ssristories.org, you're going to see case file after case file of people on these medications who just all of a sudden at random commit acts of violence and suicide. And one of my favorite stories from over there is this student who tried to commit suicide, and they intervened. He survived. When after it was all over, they said, why'd you try and kill yourself? And he says, I don't know. It just popped into my head, and I couldn't help myself. And it sounds very similar to what we have with this Officer Noor, just sitting there in the car with his partner, and all of a sudden just drawing his gun, reaching across and shooting this woman in the stomach. And again...
It's really hard to believe. It's really hard. Look at Mike. It's really hard to believe. So we say that on prescription drugs, that's what helps us make us believe a real impossible story.
Well,
so most of these shootings in the last couple of years are very questionable. So I'm just saying.
But again, what is the purpose? I mean, if she'd been black, yeah, I would go along with the idea that this is a provocation.
For real, Mike.
Are you going to let me talk?
You don't know if the story is for real.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Okay. That's somebody who didn't want to have a discussion. They're here to push an agenda. I mean, if this victim had been black, then yes, you could entertain the idea that this is an attempt to stir up race riots again. But she's this white Australian girl. Nobody's going to be rioting in the streets. We're angry over what happened, but you're not going to be able to get Black Lives Matter in the streets over this. I think this was a classic case of another bad reaction to prescription antidepressants. And don't forget, there was that study done down in Florida saying that police officers are a higher per capita use of these medications than the general population, and the general population is running somewhere 24-25% of people are on these medications. You go on out and you do a web search, you'll see all these articles by people who were prescribed antidepressants. They didn't even want them. The doctor just said, sure, just go take this, you're going to be better. I mean, that was how my one experience with them came about. I was seeing my doctor over a completely unrelated matter, And she says, how are you doing? Because I was going through the breakup of my first marriage, and she said, you want some of this. And I don't even remember what the name of it was. And for the first few weeks I was on it, I was happy. I was fun to be with. I was being invited to parties. And then all of a sudden there was this horrible backlash where I was literally just sitting in a corner on the floor saying, it's the chemical, it's the chemical, it's the chemical. And that was the only way I got through it. And I'll never touch those medications again. They are dangerous, but because they make money, they are still being pushed on the American people. That's the only thing that really makes sense to me. I mean, even this officer's partner is saying he's stunned. He has no idea what happened. I want to know if this Officer Noor was on prescription antidepressants. Okay, let's see. Let's go to Mike in Alaska. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, they didn't even want to report about the background of the officer that shot that woman. I think that's a very important factor here. I think, like a caller a few callers ago mentioned, the multiculturalism. We're bringing people in that come from very violent cultures where this may not be even out of the ordinary. Now, we're going in there and stirring things up and invading and doing all these terrible things as well. But we don't need to be over in these places, and those people don't need to be in St. Paul or wherever this was. But
well, I don't know where Officer Noor came from. He could be second or third generation. And he'd apparently been on the force for 2 years, so he wasn't exactly a newbie either. And that makes what he did even that much more inexplicable. I mean, he hadn't had any problems before. In 2 years, there hadn't been a problem.
Right. But what they're finding out, for example, in Europe, is that these second, third, fourth generations are getting less integrated as time goes on. So in Europe, some of the hardworking people from the Islamic world that came in maybe in the 70s, it's their kids and their grandchildren that are doing these nail bombs and these things that we're looking at now in London. So it's actually getting worse. It's a bit
but in that case, these are people who are being recruited by intelligence agencies to stage these terror attacks for whatever agenda there is. Okay, I just confirmed that Mohammed Noor was an immigrant from Somalia. And apparently, up until this shooting, was doing a very good job. So it's...
well, it's very low impulse control, as we saw, and that's actually not uncommon in Somalia.
Well, it's also impulse control is also a problem on prescription antidepressants. Apparently, this Officer Moore was praised by the Minneapolis mayor in 2015. I got to tell you, I think it's the prescription antidepressants. I want to know what medications he was on, because those things are very dangerous.
They are. I agree with that completely. I'd love to know the answer to that question as well.
I'm going to try and find out.
Of several things.
I'm going to try and find out.
But I think that caller that mentioned the Asian societies versus what's been going on here, I think, and 1965 Immigration Act, that is right on. And unfortunately, what happens is that, and this has happened many times in history, we can just go look at other examples, is that when you create a minority-majority country, everyone just starts fighting, and then the largest minority group that remains pushes all the other ones around and says this is how it's going to be, or purges them. And none of us actually want that, but our immigration policy is setting us up for that. So
well, you need to take a step back here. You need to take a step back here and realize that immigration works or not based on the economics. Now, during the heyday of American immigration, back with the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island, and they were bringing in all these people from mostly Europe, it worked because these people coming into the country had economic opportunities. There were jobs. They were able to make that new life for themselves. It's very different today in both Europe and the United States of America. These people are being lured into this country with all kinds of glorious promises of what they're going to find here, and they wind up in Europe and the United States. There are no jobs. There are no economic opportunities, and they're very angry, and they can't get back home, and they're acting out. If we had an economy that could support jobs for all these new people, I don't think we'd be seeing anywhere near these kinds of problems.
And the jobs that are good manual labor jobs were sent over to Asia predominantly. So it's so crazy that we bring in groups that are generally manual laborers when manual labor is disappearing. That just boggles my mind. Regardless of the culture and the language issues, it's just like they're not going to be working at NASA. That's just so, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Does that make any sense?
It does. I wouldn't use the phrase manual labor as much as I would use skilled labor. Because there's certainly a lot of manual labor that needs to be done in this country, in particular with the roads and bridges. Anyway, Mike, I'm going to let you go here. We're coming up on a commercial break, and I've got another caller waiting, but I'm going to wait until after the commercial break on that one. Now, normally I do not do entertainment news here, but Claire is a big fan of Doctor Who. Who is currently played by Peter Capaldi, and apparently BBC has announced that the next Doctor, if you're familiar with the show, the Doctor regenerates every once in a while so they can have a new cast member continue the character, and the next one is going to be a woman, and it has provoked a rather surprising and alarming backlash. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. I'm going to ask our callers waiting on the line to be a little more patient with me because I want to get through these two stories. So over at Doctor Who, and if you're not familiar with the show, it's a very, very long-running series. It goes back for decades. And they get around the problem with the lead star getting old and retiring with this idea that every once in a while Doctor Who has to regenerate, and he always comes back as somebody new. And that's why there have been all these different doctors through the years. And apparently the next Doctor Who will be a woman played by Jodie Whittaker. And this has actually provoked a rather surprising backlash among the show's fanatics, who have simply grown up with the idea that Doctor Who is a guy. And they're seeing it as caving it in to the PC crowd. And apparently BBC is getting a lot of angry letters and emails and phone calls and everything. I personally don't have a problem with it. It may be interesting. In fact, when Elementary made Moriarty a female character, I thought that was an interesting twist. But after the flop of the feminized Ghostbusters, I'm a little surprised BBC went ahead with this, and I suspect that the new female Doctor Who is probably going to be a bit of a ratings wreckage here. One more story before we go back to the phones. Apparently over at the University of Iowa, Professor Sarah Bond wrote an article denouncing the use of white marble in artwork as an expression of white supremacy. And she says we shouldn't be imagining all these Roman statues, reliefs, and everything, because the white marble was intended to be a symbol of white supremacy. And even in this article, it points out that these artwork from Rome weren't white when they were made. They were painted in bright, garish colors, which have simply faded over the time. Traces still remain. In fact, many, many years ago, this would be back in the early 1980s, mid-1980s, and I was working for a computer animation company, and we volunteered our services to the J. Paul Getty Museum to do some computerized image enhancement of some of their Roman marbles to bring out the color that was in there. It was one of the earliest applications of CGI imaging as a non-invasive method of seeing what they had originally looked like. And J. Paul Getty then went on to develop their own department. So, no, it wasn't set up to be an expression of white supremacy. They weren't even supposed to be white when they were made. But the PC crew is just grabbing everything they can and saying, I'm offended, I'm offended. Okay, be offended, but just go away and don't demand I be offended with you. All right, let's take some phone calls here. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Mike, I agree with you 100% about the psych drugs. That I think anybody in a job where they have to, where physical force is required, especially where you can shoot, we actually have under certain circumstance, you can shoot somebody. There's no way that you should be taking those drugs. It should be banned completely. Those type of jobs. But I'm also going to tell you a possibility that might have happened that you're not going to like. I know. you're going to probably think, but I have to say it. Two possibilities. There's a lot of problems with the Somali community that's coming into this country, especially in around Minnesota, right? One possibility, I don't say it's the truth, but it could be, is this guy was doing some kind of a personal jihad, that he just actually became a police officer, being that he could infiltrate into, it's easier to infiltrate because he can go and get around different places and all that with a badge and all that, an ID card. The other possibility also is that he might have been, I don't know if this woman was wearing her yoga outfit or not when she came out.
She was in her pajamas.
That's, very enticing. Oh, she was in her pajamas. So then that wouldn't be the case. I was thinking maybe it offended him or something like that. But I do have to think that possibility. I don't say that's the case. It's very possible, as he said, it's psych drug. I'll tell you this. They're not recruiting people properly for these police departments. And the more liberal cities are actually recruiting more. You have more of these shootings in these more liberal cities than you have in more conservative
yeah, but
areas.
you see, this guy was doing a good job. He got honored by the mayor, or spoken highly of by the mayor in 2015. So, I mean, this is just out of left field. Anyway, Mark, got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Just taking a look here from a web search. Article out of academia.edu, antidepressants, dangerous medications for working cops. Over at the Pulse of Natural Health, new evidence antidepressants are causing an epidemic of violence. Article over in the Daily Mail, could antidepressants make you violent? Young people who take drugs, including Prozac, are 50% more likely to be convicted of assault and murder. Another one over at the Free Thought Project, landmark study shows antidepressants make people twice as likely to consider violence and suicide. There is a problem there. There is a problem there. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Francis in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you.
Aloha, nui nui.
Well, actually, one is it's pretty obvious that such interesting drugs, which was unrelated to the two thoughts I had for you to start with, is only because those synthetic concoctions do not allow you to think. They block conscious reason and thought. So it's no wonder that people have moments where they do something that makes absolutely no common sense whatsoever, other than it going out the window. One, as far as the aspect of people being here that probably should not be in the U.S., that get in and whatever have you and so forth, if there is such an issue with that, which apparently the federal government wants them here because they get to do what they want to because of it. In other words, problems, solution, whatever, that's how getting in dialect it. But if they really wanted to get rid of them, then they could have done that like they did the indigenous Native Americans back in the 1800s when they basically moved them out of their homes and property and so forth back at that time. Now, as for the officers and so forth and this woman being shot in Minnesota, I'm just trying to figure out, since I'm not that familiar with the scenario, what his buddy, his partner, whatever that was behind the wheel, what he did other than calling in the report that the woman was shot or a man down or whatever the case is. And did he confiscate the firearm from his partner in the vehicle?
We don't have those details yet, but obviously somebody had to call for the ambulance, and there were witnesses around there. And again, it just is completely inexplicable. And again, I don't go with this idea that this guy was an undercover jihadi because to basically be a good cop for 2 years just to take out one infidel, it's not exactly cost effective. And again, the only thing that makes sense to me, and again, I'm looking at all these articles, and do it for yourself. Do a web search on SSRIs and violence, and you will see there is a problem there. And Congress actually held hearings on this some years ago, but of course they did nothing because those giant pharmaceutical corporations are very generous campaign contributors.
That's putting it lightly, but yes. That's what... apparently there's a lot of holes going on here and there, but I think it was probably one of the witnesses that actually called in for an ambulance or whatever, because I think between the two officers in the vehicle and one's got their service revolver drawn, I feel for the driver. For that matter. I mean, A woman standing there with her pajamas on. I mean, come on. Was if that officer was on drugs, did he see something on her pajamas move, or was it the wrong color, or whatever have you?
Well,
that was offensive?
If he was on prescription antidepressants, I mean, I'm ruling out hallucinogens like LSD or anything like that. But if he was on antidepressants, his brain may have just fired off saying pull gun and shoot, and he wouldn't have been able to stop himself. That's really a big problem with these. And again, if you go over to ssristories.com and take a look, you will see all kinds of stories like this of perfectly normal, well-behaved people who are put on these medications, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they're killing their parents, they're killing themselves, and it just doesn't seem to have any reason whatsoever. It's just the brain is malfunctioning, and they're coming to understand that the theory behind SSRIs doesn't really work anyway. And we don't even really we just barely understand the brain as a biochemical computer. And we start pouring in all these chemicals into it to make a fast buck, and it's causing a lot of harm. But as long as it's making money for the big pharmaceutical corporations, our government's going to continue to tolerate it and cover it up. Now, you remember back when they were talking about Anamlanza and the medications he was on, and they were trying to make the argument that even if the medications were responsible for his violence in that one case, it wasn't important for the American people to know because they would stop taking their medications. And when you look at how deeply Connecticut's economy is dependent on pharmaceutical corporations, you understand what the real agenda here was. Protect the profits. People are unimportant. Protect the profits.
Well, that's true because, quite frankly, you're reminding me of one comment. It's called slow kill. So that's one way of doing it. Have a good one.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch to James in Ohio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Wayne, I would like to explain in brief why SSRIs are so different and more dangerous than other drugs. Whereas other drugs like benzodiazepines or tobacco will cause the brain to produce more receptors that respond to these drugs. SSRIs are singular in that they will actually cause the brain cells that respond to them, serotonergic neurons, to sprout all over the brain where they were never intended to be. This is a completely unintentional side effect, and it also makes quitting them extremely difficult because receptors turn over after a time. Proteins don't last forever, but of course, brand new brain cells are, they last quite some time. And the best analogy I could think of on the fly is if you had a computer processor and you put new transistors all over it without regard to any structural order. And of course, serotonin has a dramatic impact on human behavior. So, and I know you don't like to speculate on this type of thing, but I estimate a greater than 50% chance that they knew about this in advance, and this was intentionally released because of this effect, because the people who run the world in general, the main way that they maintain power is to just mess things up for the rest of us. They could care less how much disorder there is as long as we provide them comfort and, make them feel like gods. But, you have to be on them a while for this to occur to some extent to where it makes you violent. But it's like a whole new level compared to other drugs. I'd rather be a heroin addict or be addicted to benzodiazepines or alcohol or anything else pretty much and quit rather than SSRIs, because if this progresses to a certain point, say maybe a year, your brain will likely never ever revert back to the way it was. And some people have an easy time. Everybody's an individual, but by and large, from what I've seen, I've known a great many people on these things. I've seen the outbursts, the violence, and it also, with women and men, it also seems to negate the sex drive. And there's a very world-renowned, if creepy, a neuroscientist called his name is Dr. Michael Persinger, and he said there are more representations or dedicated structure in the brain for sex than there is for food. So when you confound that, that is likely a large part of the mechanism why it ends up with violence, other than just,
well,
rearranging the brain.
let me step on in here. When we see the strange shootings, the mass shootings, what happened in Minneapolis, and it makes the news, I think the effects are actually much wider than that, because there are varying degrees of violence. And one of the things that we did here is we took the per capita usage of SSRIs over time as they began to penetrate the mass market, and we compared it with the per capita incidence of domestic violence, and we found a very, very strong correlation. So these medications that the people are on, they may not lead to murder and suicide, but they could be leading to road rage, they could be leading to bar fights, they could be leading to slapping your spouse around. Again, Occam's razor, I think the only thing that was driving this was greed. We've come up with a brand new product, and it's addictive, and we're going to get people on it, and we're going to make a lot of money. And I think that was basically all there was to it. And the fact that it actually seems to be causing this harm, well, as long as the government's going to look the other way, we're going to do this. And like I said, Congress did hold hearings on this problem and chose not to do anything about it. And again, because of the financial power these giant pharmaceutical industries have.
And as far as the rationale for SSRIs, they've sampled cerebrospinal fluid, etc. They've done all these tests. There's a type of fMRI that can, in a very gross way, see neurotransmitter concentrations in the brain in real time. And there is absolutely no scientific evidence whatsoever for that. If you remember the chemical imbalance theory that was promoted so broadly, there's no scientific evidence whatsoever that the mechanism behind the SSRIs should improve people with depression. But that's all I have for you. I just want to make sure that people know if they take those drugs, it's like some horrible genetic birth defect, or it's like you're creating a brand new species. Your brain is totally unlike anything that was ever supposed to exist in nature.
Yeah,
that's all I have for you. Thank you for letting me.
Thanks a lot. And like I said, the one time I was on these medications, and I wish I could remember the specific one that my doctor put me on. For the first few weeks there, I was very happy, clearly artificially so. So I did feel good. It was a feel-good pill. And then I had that horrible backlash, and I will not touch them ever again. All right, let's go to David in South Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, in regards to the antidepressants, I got placed on one a few years back, and I have this quick reaction to the medications, and I've been placed on several different ones, but immediately, within a few days, I felt like I wanted to kill myself and everyone around me, It was really, really quick acting, and I had to stop taking that stuff immediately, And there was another question I had, though. Was there anyone that done tests on powder burns on or the eardrums of the partner, sitting in the car when he reached across his partner and shot the woman? That's an open question there. I've never heard nothing about that yet. So.
Well, that just came out today here, and obviously they don't need to test for powder burns because everybody saw what happened. But you're absolutely right. This officer Newark may have deafened his partner in that driver's seat.
Yeah, because I've been up close to gunshots, and I got a perforated eardrum from loud noises from that type thing. And, it doesn't go away. It's, he would have been deafened unless he had earplugs in. That's a 9mm Glock. Or at least something to that effect,
Yeah, well, no, there would be no reason for him to have earplugs in, so yeah, he probably suffered ear damage.
Yeah. All right, well, I appreciate your show, Mike. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, thanks an awful lot, especially when you consider they're in that semi-confined space of the car. Yeah, that driver probably suffered permanent ear damage on that one. Okay, Jeff in Austin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Hi, this is Jeff in Austin.
Yes, I know. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd like to comment on the SSRI that you mentioned earlier. I had never done it, had done all types of recreational drugs in my youth, but was drinking fairly heavily and got on one called Effexor. And it was pretty hardcore, and I think I was on it for about 3 months, and it took me at least that long to get off of it once I realized how heinous kind of it was.
Yes.
The commentary I can say on it is, as far as your impulse control, you had thoughts and you had impulses, but your actual control, it was almost like it set you outside of yourself. So everything you were doing, you would see that you were doing, but you weren't actually in complete and total control of it. And regardless of all the other side effects of getting off other recreational drugs in my past, there was nothing even close to the withdrawals or dealing with it. So what really wound up happening was I had taken my wife into the counselor. I thought that that an MD would be more appropriate for opening up the egg. That used to be the classical wisdom. I wasn't the biggest fan necessarily of. I studied modern psychology in college and all the rest of it, so I just thought an MD would be more appropriate. But what I found out was that it was really all about prescribing hardcore drugs.
Yeah.
And
it's pushing
and
the
it was
product.
all supported by, absolutely, 100%. And the kind of the linchpin or the changing of the situation was I took my wife in for marital counseling after I started these other psychoactive drugs that were unbelievable. And the doctor told us, and my wife is totally sane, and I really had an alcohol issue at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But his commentary after all of that was that if he could not prescribe some sort of drugs for her, that there was nothing he could do for our relationship or our other issues.
Oh, man.
At that point, that was the end of it all. So I realized at that point, okay, that's the end of this. I'm getting off these drugs, and it wasn't easy. And it took probably about 3 or 4 months. But ultimately, I got off of it, and that was the end of it, and quit drinking. And I've been married 21 years, and amen to that. So thank you, Mike. And I'm really glad that you're covering this topic. And I've been listening to you and RBN since the beginning.
Well, thank you very much, and congratulations on the longevity of your marriage. Claire and I are coming up on our 25th end of the year, and looking forward to the next 25 after that.
Well, I love hearing Claire on Fridays, and thank you.
Well, she's going to be here again this Friday, so you got lots to look forward to. Okay, we're going to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to be back. We're going to try and fit some more phone calls in before the end of the show. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get to all of you, but we'll do our best. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And, boy, we've hit a hot button. I'm getting tons of email with all these stories about people who were harmed by these medications or knew somebody who was harmed by these medications, and links to all kinds of articles. There's been a lot of research done on this, and corporate media will not report it, and government will not do anything about it for the same reason. These pharmaceutical corporations have got huge amounts of money to spend on campaigns and advertising. All right, let's go back here to the phones here. Chuck in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, great to talk to you again. I've got an idea for you. Assuming that you're correct, and I think you might be, can you imagine the interesting fight that would happen if enough of us contacted his appointed lawyer when it comes up, if we can find him, to let him know to use that as a defense? Can you imagine the interesting fight between Big Pharma and Protect a Cop?
Well, you know, there actually was one case where somebody who committed an act of violence was acquitted. The judge said, yeah, it's obviously the medication. because the guy had no prior history of violence whatsoever, and it was just right after taking the medication that he did this. So there's already a legal precedent for that.
Well, with the national interest in this story, perhaps finally the SSRI issue will come to the forefront.
I would like to see that happen here. Listen, I need to cut you off. I got 2 more calls. I'm going to try and jam on in here. Joel in Wisconsin, aloha. What's on your mind?
This is related to that shooting in Minneapolis. Living in a time when the government media complex has been lied to us all our lives, wouldn't it make more sense to try to figure out if what they said really did happen rather than try to figure out why it may have happened if it did?
Well, considering how bad it makes the police look and the local government look, what would be the motive to lie to us about it? Again, it doesn't make sense. Look for what should be there and isn't, and what isn't in this case is a reason for them to just make this up out of thin air. It makes immigration look bad because the guy's from Somalia. It makes the police look bad for gunning down another totally innocent person. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. Joel, thank you very much. We've got time for one more phone call. Chris in Las Vegas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, as a recent victim of medical kidnapping and being taken political terrorism hostage to the Lakes Crossing Center in Sparks, Nevada from Las Vegas, I had the opportunity to observe some of the very dangerous symptoms of exposure to some of these suicidal psychotropic drugs that they give you as so-called treatment and medication that they offer up in these medical so-called psychiatric infirmarities and Class 3 maximum security facilities. And I was deemed competent, but I was gotten out relatively quickly because I was observing the transcutaneous muscle tremors that accompanies the administration of these so-called psychotropic chemicals that manifest themselves through shakes through the body, particularly the arms and the legs and various sundry applications.
I'm sorry to I'm sorry to have to cut you off. It's the end of the show. There's our exit music here. And
Thank you, Michael.
All right, thank you very much. All right, there's the music. Please stay tuned to John Stadmiller's program. It's going to be very, very interesting. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. If anybody finds out that this officer in Minnesota was on any kind of prescription antidepressant, please forward that information to me. We need to know exactly what was going on with that. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.